what a pleasure to be at the Free Library of Philadelphia. I love that. No, I love that. It's sort of redundant because an enslaved library is an oxymoron. Tyrants tremble before the Dewey Decimal System and everything that succeeded it. It's fantastic, actually, in America, how libraries could light the flame of insurrection. I remember being very moved by discovering that Thomas Jefferson, in order to stoke what were already the considerable fires of his own indignation about the tyranny being exercised by George III, used to go to a local library in Williamsburg, and there he would read deeply in the debates of the English Civil War of the 1640s that ended up cutting off the head of the king. And you imagine him looking at the Putney debates and the discourses of the Levellers and the stirring parliamentary debates and think if, that could happen really in the land of tepid tea and early to bed, anything could happen in an American library. Well, so you hope. So the Free Library of Philadelphia, fantastic ghosts of Franklin. And I did want in this series actually to come to Philadelphia, partly because one of the programs was called American Fervor, which is about religion. And it was really particularly about black African American and religion. And we had to make a choice between, so I'm here really in the spirit of reparation, between Savannah and Philadelphia. And somehow, Savannah cuisine won over the cheesesteak. Don't ask me why. I know. Lousy taste, right? Exactly right. So this project, both book and television, and I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards about how the writing is very different for both these forms of craft, which crafts I believe they are, actually. But both the book and the television project were born, I would say, half of desperation and half of exhilaration. The desperation part was not actually the sense of the great Republic of the United States, in which I've spent half my life going to hell in a handbasket in 2006 and 2007, although it might be argued it looked very much that way. No, the desperation was born of extreme frustration, actually, at the simplicities that were inflicted on descriptions of the United States by many of my friends and by opinion in Europe and in Britain in particular, with which I was very close, working as I do for the BBC. Among those simplicities were, for example, cowboy politics. You heard the same lazy cliches born of, journalistic habits of occupying bi-coastal positions, preferably in a bar, and flying over the rest. It'll be a long time before you find a BBC stringer in Duluth, for example, I would have thought. More's the pity. Some of those simplicities, cowboy politics, American militarism, religion in particular, gets up my nose when it's described in Britain as a prisoner of the evangelical right, when, of course, religion, an intensely important and noble part of America's history. I speak as someone really rather on the side of Jefferson's deism. Jefferson, by the way, how many of you think Jefferson... Oh, it's an easy question. There will be an exam, by the way. They told you that before we let you out, right? How many of you think Jefferson believed that Jesus was the Son of God? You are so clever, Philadelphians. Go. I gave you that so you could all feel good about yourselves, but you didn't. Indeed, he sort of ran on a platform. Adams is, and let's see, you're a bottle of Burgundy to someone. What was John Adams's, John Adams, who must have had his own Lee Atwater, really. What was his most damning slogan in the election of 1800? It feels like just yesterday, the election of 1800. Everybody, does it not? What was the most damning slogan against Jefferson? Come on, class. Someone... Very good. Who said godless? Okay, you get the bottle anyway. It's not quite right, and but you get a half bottle. No, it was the election Adams ran on God or Jefferson and no God. It's fantastic to think of. Jefferson, of course, did believe in an almighty creator. He believed it was an absurdity to suppose the universe created itself. He was not a materialist, he was not an atheist, but he thought it was equally absurd. You know, the virgin birth, give me a break already. You know, it sort of belied any possible rationality. Jesus is a great moral teacher, but not the Son of God. So religion is a complicated process in the United States. And above all, religion, of course, has been instrumental in the African-American community's sense of its own self-determination, both from the noble period of the antebellum slave churches all the way through to the civil rights movement. You can't possibly think of the civil rights movement having been effective without preaching and teaching. Riverside Church is just around the corner from where I teach at Columbia, right the way through to Barack Obama's involvement with the church. Both with Jeremiah Wright's church, but the church more generally. So it wasn't a surprise to me, although it may have been unpalatable for some of my liberal friends to find that Obama actually wanted to continue George Bush's policy of faith-based initiatives. It actually is in keeping with his sense that that's not necessarily a reactionary move. So to cut a long story short, the desperation part was really trying to write a book, not, you know, that would explore stories with you, with the American public, but also try and educate my friends out of these obtuse and opaque simplicities. And the biggest simplicity of all, I thought, was that in Europe during, as they tend to put it in a kind of entirely dispassionate way, as one of my friends said, the long, dark years of W, that Americans are basically an historically stunted culture. You know, it's this kind of snobby thing that British say, by which they mean, you know, that there are kind of no medieval knights clanking around in rusty suits of armor in North Dakota, though, you know, we call those Harley-Davidson riders, actually. But what they really mean is that history doesn't play a part in the formation of the conscience. I said, absolutely not. Gore Vidal, one of the cleverest things and one of the most misleading things Gore Vidal ever said was to describe the United States as the United States of amnesia. The impression that history doesn't matter to the American people is derived entirely understandably by the mind-numbing phenomenon called the social studies textbook. In fact, folks, can we, Philadelphia famous for firebrand causes, tonight, in this room, at this moment, launch the campaign to abolish the dreaded words social studies. Yes! Take back the discipline. We are going to call it history. Okay. Yeah, because history is about flesh and blood. It's about memory. And, of course, all you know that, you know, beach blockbusters are another doorstopper in the life of Benjamin Franklin. Very wonderful they are too, David McCullough and John Adams, Ron Chernow and Alexander Hamilton. Americans live and breathe history in a way in which Europeans imperfectly understand, because it's the remit of the Supreme Court in the first place to interpret the wish of the Founding Fathers every single day and week during which Supreme Court is in session in order to make the Constitution, that living, breathing, organic thing, work. It was actually a Briton, a Scot, Lord Bryce, actually, who was the sort of closest that the British got to Tocqueville, who tried to educate his own countrymen back in Britain on the vitality, the enduring vitality, precisely because it was always open to discussion, debate, and interpretation of the Constitution. And sometimes one feels, when one listens to the historian-in-chief in the White House, who can barely make a speech, really, without invoking, as he did, somewhat mournfully, I have to say, Washington staring gloomily at the ice floes on the crossing of the Delaware at the end of the inaugural speech. Whoa, there's a kind of warm and cuddly moment for the folks, actually, as freezing as we all were out there in Washington on that great and glorious day. You sometimes have the impression that, you know, Obama is getting the very best advice from a crack cabinet, because it consists of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln, with whom he somewhat compulsively identifies. So there is this sense, actually, I think, of the Founding Fathers, because they debated what America was to become, the possibilities of America. America was founded as an act of separation from the vice and misdemeanors and errors and poltroonery of the miserable old world of so many blood-boltered Machiavellis. It would be a new thing in the world. It would be a place in which you could become an American irrespective of tribe or origin or nation or class, simply by virtue of subscribing to the great democratic ideal of freedom, unless, of course, oops, you were black.